This is the Uploading Files with Blazor mini course. In this video, we're going to associate our file upload with form data rather than just uploading the file independently. We'll be building off the code from our last video. Now, this video is part of a mini course around uploading files. I would encourage you to click on the playlist in the description and use it to go through the course in order. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and my goal is to make learning C# easier. I have hundreds of videos here on YouTube with more coming out each week. I have a podcast answering questions developers have, and I provide training courses designed to give you the real-world training and experience needed to succeed in today's marketplace. You can find all the resources I have to offer at IamTimCorey.com. Okay, let's go back to our code. This is the working code that we had when we left. So if we run this right now, and again, if you're just picking up in the middle, that's okay. If you just want to learn this part, that's totally fine. But just know that we're not going to go back and start this code over. We already have a bit of a working demo. We can choose files, we can select the files, we can upload those files, and those files go to a directory. Now, right now I've deleted that directory's storage, there's nothing in there. But if we were to upload a file, let's just grab my face, it goes and creates the folder tcorey, and inside that we now have that image. And that tcorey is because we're simulating that's who's logged in, is Tim Corey. So it's not just a headshot we choose. So if I chose Noah there, oh, Noah's is too big. We left that in there. But if we upload other pictures, they would go there as well. It's just that my picture is the only one that's small enough. So let's go ahead and go back here to storage and delete that, so we can start off fresh, and we can start off, let's go ahead and change it back to 3 megabytes because one is just not big enough. We have some larger images in there. Okay, so what we're going to do in this video is we're going to kind of bring the real world back into play. The previous video, we talked about, hey, here's how to upload a file, and it's just a very simple, here's the code. But that's not really real world, right? When we upload a file, there's more than just, hey, upload the file. We've got to associate with data. We've got to put it in SQL Server. We've got to get it back out of SQL Server and use it. All these kind of things we need to do. And so this is kind of the next step in that process, which is let's associate it with some other data. We're going to simulate that we're creating a new customer record. And that customer record will have some data associated. A first name, a last name, a file name of the file, the upload, and probably an ID. So let's go ahead and create that in our data folder. Now I could create a separate class library to put this in. We're going to leave this right in the UI. How you structure your application may be different, and that's okay. The size of your application will determine how you structure things. But for our simple demo, we can just put a new class right in our data folder. And we'll call this customer model. And we'll use the file scope namespaces, put a semicolon at the end here so we can make this a little smaller. And in here, let's create a few properties. So an ID, and we'll have a string. We'll call it username. And that's the logged in user. So we'll, again, hard code this to tcorey. Again, we're not putting authentication into this app. We talked about that last time, but this would be simulating if you were authenticated, because you should be authenticated before you start uploading files. This would grab that authenticated user's username to associate with whatever they do. That way we know, oh, Tim was the one that uploaded or created this new customer, that we can go back and have a trail of who did what. But in our case, since we don't have authentication, it's a whole nother topic. We just hard code it to say tcorey instead. Okay, so we're going to have a nullable string called first name, a nullable string called last name, and how about a nullable string called file name? So I'm making these nullable strings because I don't know that they will have values initially. So I'm going to assume that they can be null at some time. Now, I could say, no, these are required, and I can actually say required. The problem is that when I create this instance of this class, I won't know the first and last name. I'll be asking for it from the form. So I'm going to make them nullable. And we've got here the first and last name, really simple customer information, just what's the customer's name. That's pretty much it. The ID will be in a database, which we're not going to use in this lesson, but in a future lesson, we're going to create a SQL table that captures this information, and that will be the identifier for that record. So it'll be 0 or not set for this model. And then we'll have, last of all, the file name. And again, we're going to be uploading this file and associating it with a SQL record, which we'll do in a future video, but we're not going to put the actual file in the database. And we'll talk more about that in that video. But I think it's important to note that we'll just be storing the file path. So that file name will include the path, the relative path, we'll talk more about that, to the file, where it's located. Okay, so that gives us our customer model. Now let's go over to our index page and let's make some modifications here because we need to capture more information. So let's say private customer model, which we don't have the using for. So control dot here to add the using statement. And that adds that right up here, add or at using upload files app.data. So we'll say customer model, we'll call it new customer equals new. We are going to instantiate this because we're going to start using this for our form. So our form, let's come up here to, we're going to put an edit form right after upload demo, but we're going to move this into it in a minute. But let's start with just an edit form. I'm going to immediately close this out. And the reason why is because it just works better with the editor than trying to create it and then start putting things in it. It just gives weird errors. So if I do this first, and then I can say model equals new customer, which that refers to this right down here. It used to be, we have to put the @ symbol in front of this to indicate kind of like this, that it was C# code. But we don't have to anymore. It's better just to leave it off. So that's kind of an upgrade we have now. All right, so let's create a simple form. So we're going to create a div. Inside here, we'll create a label for equals first name. And we'll say first name. And then we'll create the input text. The ID equals first name. That's what associates the label with the input. And the class equals form control. That makes the text box a little nicer. And we're going to say bind value equals new customer dot first name. So it binds it to the first name property of our model. So say, hey, I want you to bind this field, first name, to the first name field of the model. So when we get done and submit the form, then we'll have the new customer object filled with all the information it needs, or almost all the information. Let's copy this. This is a dangerous action, copying. Copying and pasting is a way to introduce bugs into your application. So be very careful, because if you don't change everything, so I'm going to change every reference. If you don't change every reference in here, then and you miss one, it may look right, but it won't work right, and you'll have weird errors. So just be very careful, okay? That's the word of advice here. So I'm going to paste it one more time. And this time it's going to be for, let's call this profile picture. And we're going to call this profile picture. And let's get rid of this entry right here. So you have our label, but we need an input file. So let's grab our input file from here. We're going to cut it out from there and paste it in there. So it's now inside the form, but we're not done yet. First of all, I don't want multiple. You don't want to have multiple profile pictures, just one. So take multiple off. That will change our code as well. So you have to modify this load files. We'll get there in just a minute. And we need to have a button at the end. This is btn-primary, and we'll make the margin top on this is 3. I don't need some spacing between the div and the button. And the type equals submit. And if you're not familiar with these classes I'm adding, these are Bootstrap classes. Bootstrap 5 is built into Blazor unless you use the blank template. But it's what I'd encourage you to use because Bootstrap's a really, really powerful CSS system that makes life a lot easier. And it makes it so you don't have to write a lot of CSS code. It does it a lot for you. I'm actually creating a course right now on Bootstrap 5 because it is that important. I think that it's really valuable to know Bootstrap and know how to use it. Okay, create customer. That's the button name. That's all for our edit form. I think that we've got the error stuff down below. That's good. So I think we'll leave it there, and we're going to make some changes now down here. So first of all, let's add one more private member iBrowser file, make it nullable, and call it file. So it's going to be a null file, and we're going to let's start with the. I'm going to change this load files. So let's do this. Let's cut all this stuff out because we're not going to do that. We're just going to say file equals e.file. So when you load files, by the way, this can be just now a void. When you say load files, we're just going to take the file, not files, the file that you passed me and put it into this private variable. That's all we're going to do. Now, we're not quite done yet because all that did is add a reference, didn't actually put the entire file there. It's just a reference to or a pointer to that file. We have to stream the file, which we're going to do in another method. Let's call this private async task of, I think type string, capture file. Okay, and we're going to put our code that we did before. So let's paste it in here, but we have some things to address here. So let's go through and address this. First of all, we're not going to clear the errors because we'll do that in another spot. And we are going to say if file is null, then return an empty string. So if there is no file, so if this was never run, then return empty string. And why an empty string? Because we're going to put this return value into the new customer model. So if we put an empty string, this means there's no file. Okay, and so we're acknowledging there's no file there. We're going to leave it alone. We could put null, which we could make this a nullable string, but I think empty string will work. So with that, we don't have to do the max allowed count because we don't have more than one file, which also means we don't have this for each. So let's get rid of this for each, which means that this curly brace at the end goes away too, and we can Shift Tab to bring those back. If you don't know, when you highlight multiple lines and you say Shift Tab, it moves the indent to the left one indent. So Tab will move it to the right one indent. Shift Tab will move it back. So a little pro tip there. Okay, so now let's check our code to make sure that our code still holds up. I think it does. We're doing all the same thing. We call it file, which was strategic because that was the name of what we used in our loop. So it still says file.name and all the rest. So now we are good for the most part, but we do want to add one more capture value. I'm going to put it right here. String relative path equals path.combine tquery and new file name. Now, why are we creating this? Because it's going to be the relative path to wherever we had it in storage. So this needs the the full path. So the actual path, that's the combination of where we're going to store it in storage plus tquery plus the new file name. So in our example, it's storing it in dtemp storage is this first value here, and then tquery, and then the file name. Well, we want to have the relative path, though, because at the end, notice where we have a string, our task type string. We want to return relative path. That's the relative path of where that file was stored. All right, so we're storing that, and then in the catch here, we should just throw an exception as well. So if you have an error with the file, meaning it's not the file is blank, it's that there's a problem with the file itself. Well, then we shouldn't just continue on as business as usual. We should throw an exception, not just allow it to occur. So that's what we're going to do here. But now we have this capture file method. And that will allow us to capture the relative path of that file and not just toss it in disk and forget about it. But now we need to create a submit form method. Let's create this up at the top. Doesn't really matter where we put it, but private async task submit form. And we're going to put a try catch here. And yes, exception EX, because we might throw an exception here. And we're going to say errors.add. And we'll do our string interpolation, say error, and then ex.message. So if the eagle-eyed among you will notice that if we're going to call that capture file, which we are, that capture file is going to write to the error list if there's an exception, and it's going to continue to throw that exception, which means it's going to come up here and write to the error list again. So in theory, we might have the same error written twice to our log. That's okay, not the end of the world. I wanted to have it in both places, so we'll leave it alone. But just note that's what might happen. Okay, string relative path equals await capture file. So capture file again is going to do the actual work of capturing a file. This doesn't happen until you submit the form. So even though we put it in this iBrowser file when we load the file, that just held the reference. It wasn't until we ran this capture file method that we actually streamed the file and put it on disk and got the path for it and all the rest. So now we can say new customer dot file name equals relative path. And what this does is it updates our model with that new file name. And that's all we're going to do today because we've captured everything we need. But let's test it to make sure it works. So let's put our breakpoint here and let's run this. Hopefully we didn't forget anything or cause any other bugs. But let's run this application. And now you'll see that our form is a little different. We have two fields plus our form. And if we bring over our storage here, the one thing I want to point out is if I select Noah's headshot, notice it chose Noah's headshot, but nothing happened over here on the right. But if I put Noah Macy and say create customer, then in theory, we should have something happen. But so far, nothing happened. And why is that? Well, that's because I forgot to do one thing. And that is I forgot to say that there's a submit form here and that I need to actually enable this. So on valid submit equals submit form. So we'll save that. That just updated. Let's choose a file again because that's the one thing it kind of lost was the form or the file. Let's hit create customer. We now go to our breakpoint. So the breakpoint's been hit. If we inspect the new customer and look, we will see that there's a file name in the file name that looks good. There's first name and last name. My username is there and ID of 0, which is fine. So you can continue to run that. And that looks good. Now let's go over to our file and notice we have a folder now called tquery. Inside there we have Noah's headshot. and it has that same name as what we have associated with the model. So we've now said, hey, you can upload, you can click this whenever you want, but it's not until you create the customer, click that button there, where you actually submit the form, that we're going to do the upload. And notice I said on valid submit. That's something else that's important. Let's close this out. We can get rid of the T. Corey folder here. Notice that it's on valid submit right here, because you can put validation around your first name, your last name, or even the file. Make sure you have a file. But it can check to make sure that you have a valid model set up before you allow it to go through. So if you said, hey, first name and last name are both required, and they have to have a minimum length of 1 character or 10 characters, whatever you want to say for a name. Don't say a minimum characters of 10 characters for a name. My name is Tim. My last name is Corey. Neither of those is 10 characters. Now you can say, well, Timothy is longer. That's my given name. But, Corey is only 5 characters. There are names that are even shorter. So something to think through. But you could validate that, a name was actually entered, a value was actually there. So that would be an invalid submission if they didn't do it. They violated that validation, in which case you would not upload the file. So it only uploads the file if you have properly validated the information. Now, we don't have validation in this edit form. We don't have validation on our model. We could do that, but that's a totally different topic. I have covered it before on YouTube, so you could check that out. Also, just so you know, all this stuff is covered in the Blazor server course. I actually updated it for .NET 6 and .NET 7 to include file upload and validation and all the rest. So this stuff's all covered in that course on IamTimCorey.com, but I wanted to do this mini course here to kind of cover how to do it in context of other things as well. So that's where we're going to stop for today, but we're not done yet, because we've got the model fully populated, but now we should probably put this in a database. So we're going to talk through how to put it in a database, how to do it safely and securely, how to manage the idea that your data is going to move around, your web application might move around, and what does that mean for your files? Because your files are in a fixed place, right? Well, no. We're actually going to show how to move those around as well without having to re-update every single record in your database. So we'll see how to do that. We'll see how to bring those files back out and display them on a form and so on. So we're not done yet, but we're done for this video. Thanks for watching. And again, the source code link is down below. The link to the playlist for this entire series is down below. And as always, I am Tim Corey.